I'm going to be speaking to you today about cannabis. The first major piece of legislation on cannabis was the Marijuana Tax Act of 1937. We will travel through time from when cannabis was illegal to during legislation to make it illegal and afterward and its prohibition. I love learning about new topics, especially when it's as controversial as pot. This does not make me an expert, but I have done extensive research on the subject and would like to share the fruits of my labor with you. So we now know that the Marijuana Tax Act was passed in 1937, but let's back up a bit and look at cannabis plant and its role before this bill was passed. Cannabis thrived in America in its marketplace as well as in its farmlands. Water vessel supplies were mainly made of hemp because salt water deteriorated cotton. This includes ropes and canvas ship sails. The word canvas actually derives from the Latin term cannabis, which is the plant hemp is made from. Hemp was a necessity in the early U.S. history, especially during war times when imported supplies were cut off and they couldn't get them. So now let's move on to talk about important figures during this time. Rudolf Diesel was one. He was a German inventor. You may recognize the name. He patented the diesel engine in 1893. Diesel expected his engine would run on vegetable oils and seed oils, including hemp seed oil. Henry Ford was also in the auto industry, and his first Model T ran on hemp gasoline. Then there's George Schlichten, who is an inventor, and he invented a hemp decorticating machine for producing paper. This made hemp a viable paper source. Another group of important figures was he was a banker and Treasury Secretary, Andrew Mellon, which he's pictured here. DuPont Petrochemical Company owner Lamont DuPont, who's seen here. Then there's Hearst Corporation's logging company owner William Hearst, who's pictured here. And Andrew Mellon's nephew, Harry Anslinger, who is the head of the Federal Bureau of Narcotics. He's pictured here. Mellon also owned Gulf Oil Company, and his bank loaned Lamont DuPont the money to buy General Motors. William Hearst also owned nearly 30 newspapers in the mid-1900s and was a business partner of DuPont's in the paper industry. So you may be wondering how these people are connected to cannabis. Well, in 1925, Henry Ford said to a New York Times reporter that ethyl alcohol was the fuel of the future. New technology had enabled the hemp industry to inexpensively produce fuel, paper, oil, and textiles. In fact, 1 acre of hemp over 20 years produced the same amount as 4 acres of trees over the same 20-year period. This makes hemp and cannabis a direct competitor to these industries. As I mentioned, Anslinger was Mellon's nephew. Anslinger presented a bill to the House Ways and Means Committee called the Marijuana Tax Act. Many speculations enveloped the reasoning around this bill being taken to the Ways and Means Committee instead of the Drug, Agricultural, or Commerce Committee. Some say it was because the Ways and Means Committee is the only one that's able to send its bill directly to the House floor without having other committees debate on the bill. Nonetheless, the bill was passed, and the House didn't even take a roll call before doing so, so they don't know exactly who voted on it at the time. This act instituted a prohibitive tax on cannabis as well as its seeds. After this bill passed, production of cannabis and hemp was eventually outlawed in 1938. So we now know that the Secretary of Treasury, Andrew Mellon, had direct ties to the auto, fuel, oil, and paper industries through his personal business ventures. Cannabis was once a direct competitor in all these industries, but it is now illegal. Now that cannabis is illegal, we can skip ahead to modern legislation of the plant. Cannabis is prohibited by the federal government completely across the board. Some states have made it legal medically, and some have legalized recreational use as well. As of April 2015, 23 states and the District of Columbia, which is Washington, D.C., have legalized marijuana uses at some level. Throughout history, Cannabis has been used to medically treat illnesses from blood clots, ulcers, expel poisons from scorpion stings, and even as an anesthetic. The word anesthesia actually derives from a Chinese word which literally means cannabis intoxication. Since cannabis is illegal, tax dollars are used to enforce that law. Approximately $16 billion each year goes to funding the incarceration of inmates imprisoned for marijuana-related crimes. So pot has been legal, illegal, and now partially legal. Regardless of your stance, now you know some facts about cannabis. We have learned about its medical, legal, and product history. We went through time and touched base on its prohibition, its partial legalization now, as well as its legislation that got it there. So even though weed is controversial, make sure that you find out the facts yourself so that you can form your own opinion about it.